Pendant longtemps, les collyres qui sont vieux comme le monde utilisent...
For a long time, eye drops that had been around for many years contained all kinds of plasters, materials, ammonia salt, for example. Charlatans were selling eye drops that were supposedly a surefire cure for all eye diseases. Needless to say, the majority of these treatments were useless. There was a revolution in ophthalmology from the second half of the 19th century, beginning firstly with the classification of diseases, as shown here in this remarkable table that describes the major eye diseases.
La deuxième révolution, c'est...
The second revolution came with the arrival of active principles such as alkaloids with pilocarpine, atropine, ezerine, which completely changed the treatment of certain diseases, not forgetting certain mineral salts.
Le problème, c'est la contamination.
The main problem was the contamination of eye drops by the patient after opening. Simply a fingertip or an eyelash could easily cause significant contamination. This is why the top European ophthalmologists became concerned with the problem of eye drop conservation. My ancestor, Paul Chibret, who founded the French Society of Ophthalmology, was one of those. So just a few words about Paul Chibret. Paul was a military doctor who trained at the Imperial School of Medicine in Strasbourg. As an officer of the French army, he wore this kind of bicorn.
Il va partir en Algérie, dans la Kabylie orientale.
He went to Algeria, where he contracted a serious ocular disease. When repatriated to Paris, his vision was saved by the leading ophthalmologists, Galezowski and De Wecker. He had promised to become an ophthalmologist if his vision was saved. In 1875, Paul Chibret arrived in Clermont-Ferrand and immediately created the ophthalmology department in the now closed Hôtel Dieu Hospital. He installed operating theatres. Each morning, he operated free of charge on patients, and as the theatre nurses were nuns, it didn't cost the state a lot of money. Each afternoon, he had a private clinic separate from his work at the hospital.
Dès son arrivée, il va...
Upon his arrival, he used these premises to develop new exploration and testing techniques, and then he very quickly focused on drugs. It was here that he carried out numerous tests with different kinds of antiseptic to improve the conservation of the eye drops, but without great result. He then turned to ointments because they resist contamination longest and offer greater security than aqueous eye drops. The problem was that the correct excipient had not yet been found. Glycerin irritated the conjunctiva, fat went rancid, butter too, even when it was washed in rosewater. Along with professors Galezowski and Panas, Paul was the first to promote a new excipient of American origin with incomparable neutrality called petroline, which very quickly became known as Vaseline. Paul Chibret asked his nephew, Henri Chibret, to open a laboratory for the manufacture of ophthalmic ointments, Chibret tubes. This was done in 1902 in Clermont-Ferrand. But it was my father, Jean, who made the greatest leap forward. My father was really a visionary. He launched the first antibiotic drops, innovated in all therapeutic classes, opened the largest global documentation centre in the field of ophthalmology, producing hundreds of movies on this specialty.
Alors à partir de 1945, l'ophtalmologie...
So, from 1945, there was an extraordinary revolution in the therapeutic field of ophthalmology, and the first of these major innovations was penicillin. I was very moved to find a sample of 1 gram of penicillin by Fleming in the Museum of the History of Medicine in Paris. This revolution continued throughout the second half of the 20th century. Ointments were abandoned in favour of eye drops because industrial glassware made great progress. The plastic bottle appeared, plastic caps could be made. The problem of the contamination of these eye drops still remained. If a patient left their eye drops on a radiator or exposed to the sun, it was sufficient for bacterial growth to occur. And this can sometimes look similar to a meringue. Chemists would return bottles, and one day my brother and I stole some of these bottles for fun to crush the meringue out of eye drops. Needless to say that we got into serious trouble.
C'est là où mon père va intervenir.
It was then that my father had the idea of introducing preservatives into eye drops that preserve their sterility for about 15 days.
Alors, quel conservateur utiliser?
So, which preservative? Originally, derivatives of mercury were used, but often caused eczema on eyelids. Then my father came up with the idea of using benzalkonium, a quaternary ammonium that was initially very promising. And yet a preservative is not trivial. For example, young ophthalmologists were accustomed to coming to the Shibori Institute to prepare their thesis. When they left, my father used to offer them a bottle of benzalkonium to clean their windshields and strip them of mosquitoes. Needless to say that if this can clean windshields and remove mosquitoes, it is certainly not trivial for the eyes. Since the late 1980s, especially in dry eye, several studies showed that quaternary ammonium were very irritating products for the ocular surface, in particular for the lacrimal film. The 1990s were marked by the discovery that drugs used in glaucoma could cause inflammatory reactions and major irritation reactions. But the relationship between the preservative and these side effects was identified thanks to the work I drove in the 1990s and which was published in 1994. This work led to this awareness that preservatives could play a role. The experimental clinical work carried out in a laboratory was soon confirmed by other teams in the world and led to an accumulation of data that clearly highlighted the perhaps not exclusive, but in any case decisive role of the preservative in these phenomena of irritation, dry eye and allergy, and that we should at least try to reduce the amount or even completely eliminate them.
L'industrie, bien sûr, a cherché
The industry, of course, looked for ways to permanently eliminate preservatives. There was the monodose, a sterile preservative-free pod, and then there was the great revolution of preservative-free multi-dose vials, which the patient could use for 1 to 3 months and which maintained their sterility during use by the patient.
C'est ici que va naître la révolution du...
The preservative-free revolution was born here. It is my father who introduced preservatives into eye drops, and I, his son, who sought to get rid of them. And so, after 10 years of research, the first preservative-free bottle, the Abac, was launched. Despite its simple appearance, this miniature bottle is in fact a concentrate of technology and innovation that helps keep the solution sterile up to 8 weeks after opening. My nephew Jean-Frédéric took charge of the next phase. Firstly, he modernised the Abac bottle, making it smaller, easier to handle, more efficient, and with a shelf life that reaches up to 3 months after opening. He tackled the contamination of gels, notably eyelid hygiene gels, by launching a steri-free technology tube which distributes sterile gels throughout the use of the product. Finally, he launched Easy Grip, a bottle that complements the range of multi-dose bottles for some molecules, in particular in the field of the treatment of glaucoma. Now, patients have a range of preservative-free treatments. Today, the preservative-free battle is won. These 150 years of history show that behind the success, there is most often a blend of tradition and innovation.